So I have been thinking about color a lot lately. Not in a homeschool project kind of way, because we're almost done with our school year and I cannot be happier, but more about how the colors inspire me and how they can really set a mood within me. Like, why do some colors give off the most perfect vintage vibe, while others remind us of cloudy days cozied up with a book, or even the greens and how they make us think of fall or even the holidays. And why sometimes when we pull yarns from our stash, we think they could possibly go together, but there's just something off about them and we can't quite put our finger on it. I think color affects us more than we realize. Think of it this way: you go into a store and there is a sea of clothes before you, and you're standing there, but you can spot this one thing on that back wall, and it makes you go into the clothing section. Was it a certain color that caught your eye? Why did it catch your eye? And what kind of feeling or what memory did it invoke within you? Or maybe you're like me and you find yourself staring at the Lowe's paint chip wall for a creepy length of time, and you're trying to decide about this perfect creamy and light wood tone theme for one part of your house, kind of like what I have out here, but in another part of your house, you're really kind of wanting to do this dopamine hits pop of color, and then you're always thinking about this dramatic library that you've dreamed about when you were a child with like dark, dark greens and golden accents. Because that's kind of where I've been lately. Because when we start thinking about those inspirations and those color themes and how they affect us, we can slow down and we begin to see that there's those kind of things in our everyday life that we can use in our projects, like the cozy coffee shop and its deep browns and the music playing in the background and how the coffee brewing just hits just right and gives us that cozy vibe. Or finding a quilt in a hope chest that you've never seen before and seeing the colors in it and think, that would be a really pretty shawl, because color has a way of telling a story. We just need to understand it. And so we're going to talk about color theory a little bit today, but not in this in-depth dive where there's these guidelines you have to try to remember, but more of an intentional slowing down and paying attention to what's around us and using that to inspire us as we pull yarns from our stash to create projects that we're going to love. I think a lot of us crafters feel like we're good when it comes to color. Like we can look at something and know what naturally is going to work and flow, but it's not always the case. A lot of times colors really come down to observation. And you saw me doing that squint test at the beginning of this, and we're going to talk about that more later and how it's a great tool for you to utilize. But we also have to think about references. Artists use references when they create their works of art. Interior designers use references when they create these immaculate rooms that we see all over Pinterest. And even fashion designers use references when they're creating their collections for various times of the year. And even as everyday makers, we often use references and we don't even think about it, but we've got them in our mind, and that's what helps us pull colors together. Once I started really paying attention to the colors around me, I was able to really utilize those in projects and use them in ways that I wouldn't have thought of before. So today we're going to talk about some practical checks that we can do to kind of help us with our color selection. But before we get into that, I want to talk about three main things that you're going to notice with color. And I'm sorry if you see this eye twitching. My allergies are going crazy. So color actually has three parts. Number one is the actual color. Number two is if it's muted or how bright it is. And the third aspect is its color value, how light or how dark it actually is. And when something usually feels off in a project, it's usually one of those three fighting against each other. It's not because we're bad at color or that we make these horrible color decisions, although sometimes I think I am. It's more that we're not understanding the role that the colors need to play together. And I mentioned in this video right here, when I did the stop guessing video, how if you take a photo in black and white, that it removes the color and then you're left with the light value and the dark value of the yarn. And you can see the contrast and how they're going to play with one another. And that's so important in knitting and crochet because that contrast is what allows your stitches to stand out, and it allows for your motif, if you're doing color work, to stand out. If you have two yarns next to each other that are too similar in contrast, then you're going to lose them and you're not going to have that separation of color. And if you have some that are completely contrasted, then they're going to have that pop for you, and that separation or that color work or that motif is really going to stand out, and those stitches are going to stand out. And it's just a little trick that can save you a lot of time in the long run, or heartache mid-project when you realize that color work motif that you've been knitting on for hours, you can't even see it anymore. And if you don't have access to take a photo, you can kind of do that squint test like I was doing at the first of the video. And artists apparently do this all the time, especially interior designers. And what it does, it takes the sharpness off the things that are in front of you, and it makes your eyes only focus on contrast. Because when you squint, lines begin to get blurred and you're just left with color and what stands out. And so you can kind of see which one has more standout or contrast just by doing that. And this is where color can get really interesting because you begin to realize that color is not just this visual thing that we have. Color is also very much tied to our emotions and how we're feeling and how they make us feel. Some feel a lot more cheerful, some feel a lot more nostalgic, some feel a lot more dramatic and deep, earthy, and grounding. And I also don't think it's random that we gravitate towards certain colors in different seasons in our life, or even different seasons in the year that we're in. Like, you typically don't grab your dark jewel tones in the summer. You go for that more beachy kind of feel, and you use these in the fall and the winter. Because sometimes bright colors can really energize us, provide us with a joyful response. And I think oftentimes we don't pay attention to that enough. And when we are feeling down, or maybe reaching for something brighter out of our normal comfort will to help inspire us and energize us. And there's almost this dopamine hit effect when we grab for bright yellows, vibrant pinks, rosy reds, electric blues, and neon greens. They can make a project feel exciting before we ever even cast it on. And sometimes colors give us more of this muted, relaxed feel that we're longing for. But then we have seasons where we just crave those dark jewel tone colors of fall and winter that I love so much. Unexpected color combinations, though, can really change how we view a project, and they can change our momentum that we have towards a project. We want to create color palettes that are going to encourage us to pick it up and work on it, and not ones that are going to make us feel burned out and want us to shove it in that project bag and stick it in the back of our closet where we never see it again. Sometimes we choose color palettes that we don't really think would work together, but they do, and we find joy in those. And I think those are great projects. I know I've had a few of those in the past. And I even noticed that when I choose some colors, they usually reflect a feeling that I'm either feeling or one that I want to feel and get out of another one. Because sometimes I do want the calm, and sometimes I do want the erratic, crazy, bright, in your face neon. And that's okay. I don't have to stick to one or the other. I can let the colors I use change and flow just like I do. And so I have some examples to show you and to talk about with you. So the first example I have is this artisanal arches blanket that I'm crocheting up. The designer is Juan the Yarn Addict, and you've seen this before, but it had a lot of craziness going on. I figured out my error and I've moved on now beyond that. But the basis for this project is this I love this yarn Blossom Opibus. I think that's how you say it. It is a color explosion of joy, and this is what it looks like worked up. This is an octopus I made years ago. He had a friend, and I gifted it to a mom, but I kept this one for myself. But in here, there's all these different colors. So I pulled colors that were represented in the yarn, and that way, I didn't really have to think about the palettes too much. I let the yarn do that for me. There is one thing about this though. In this yarn, there are these areas where there's like this dark mauve. And so I picked out this dark mauve to kind of go with it. It's not as much as it stands out. It's just in a very few of the yarn specks. But I thought it gave a great contrast. And then I wanted to have another contrast to balance that out. So I went with this other dark green from Impeccable Yarn. And that is what's giving it these bold color spots. And I'm trying to repeat them in an intentional way so that they kind of lead your eye from the center out of the blanket. It's almost like the project is telling a story. And I wanted to help that story have a theme. And that's where these two come in. I didn't have to start off with trying to find 10 cohesive colors or however many cohesive colors. With this project, I started with this one colorful yarn and I let the yarn dictate the colors that I chose to be the supporting roles in the story that it's trying to tell. I did bring in the couple other important actors to try to give it more of an in-depth meaning, but I think once we start to kind of look at colors when we're deciding for projects like this, that we don't really have to randomly guess at color palettes anymore. We just let one yarn kind of guide us through whatever we need. Another thing that really helped me change how I see color is learning about saturation. And what that basically means is how muted versus how bright something is. Because we can choose colors that could kind of work together, but something can still be off. And that's because they can be a little bit darker on one side and more brighter on the other. I try to think of this as my bright, clean colors versus my more in-depth, earthy tones. And when you try to keep those in more aligned with their other similar color tones, it can feel more cohesive, but sometimes it's fun to bring in a little bit of a pop for a little bit of contrast, like on a edging of a shawl. Another aspect of something that we should realize are try to be more intentional about when we choose color is that our eye needs a place to rest. And this is where your your neutrals are really going to play a huge role because sometimes we want to use the bright colors. I know there's been several projects that I did, but we need a neutral to kind of glue those together and make the story be cohesive so that it's not overwhelming. And I have an example of this as well. This is my Shawlography. It's a Stephen West design, and I use some crazy colors in this thing. There is a highlighter, neon yellow, bright oranges, bright pinks, bright blues, and it was all based off this one color yarn that I had right here that had a little bit of these colors in there, but then I just wanted to go wild with it. And there's even like a little bit shade different of the oranges. You can't really tell, but I ran out of one orange, and so I had to order a different kind of orange to kind of play with it to continue it on. Because the key to using a lot of bright colors like this is having a repeat in the story of whatever you're making. So you see that orange here is where I started and where I ran out, but I also used the orange here. And it's in these cross stitches, and then I didn't even use it in the bottom part. It was enough that it went through 3 times in the story of this that I thought it was fine. But that neutral of this dark gray, it's almost black, it really helps hold the whole thing together, and it helps the colors continue in their story, but it's also repeated. And that's one of the things I love about Stephen West designs. He designs in a way that your color, you can use these colors that are way out of your comfort zone if you use a neutral to help glue them together, because he's going to give you enough repetitiveness, yes, repetitiveness in the project so that they become this cohesive story, and that the colors can actually tell a story that you want to kind of see through from the very beginning to the very bottom of it. But that's one way how you can use color. And the same thing with that artisanal blanket. I'm using those two darker tone maroon and that green throughout the piece of those lighter tones to kind of help draw the eye from the center of the story, the beginning, all the way to the very end. And it's the same thing with my Sophie verse that you've seen on the back of my chair. Even in the part that's showing, you can see the repetition of color from the very center all the way out because it helps share that story of the yarn and the project. It helps carry it all the way through so your eye has a place to rest ever so often in the project and it's no longer overwhelming. Another really important thing I want to talk about is you don't have to design these palettes from scratch. You have resources around you. You have things around you that inspire you, and you can pull colors from that in a variety of ways. There's things like Visual App. I can't think of what it's called, but I'll link it down below. But it's a color visualizer, so you can upload a photo or choose a photo from online, plug it in, and then you can click on different colors in the photo. It will help pull out the colors and help you design a palette around that. And I love to utilize that for projects, even though it's actually intended for interior design. There are things like the color blocks that I'm sure you've seen. I can't think of who makes them or what they're called. They're really nice to have, but they're also kind of pricey, and you don't have to go out and buy things like that. There's also color wheels. These are on Amazon. They're relatively cheap. These kind of have a little bit more information about color theory. I'm going to link these down below if you're interested, but I have enjoyed using these when deciding for color for a project. But there's also free things around you, like the good old paint chips that you can get at your local hardware store. I love collecting these. As you can see, I punch holes in them and I put them on these little rings, but I will use these sometimes with planning out colors because a lot of these longer ones, I forgot I actually had these longer ones. These are really old. The color values are always kind of in the same um descending or ascending order. So it kind of helps you visualize in your yarn, okay, these tones, these saturation of colors, their color value are closer, so they're going to work better than opposed to doing something like this and something like that. I did find these before. I got these in 2013, no joke. I saw these at Lowe's, but I don't know if that's where the lady got the idea for her color blocks. But these are pretty old, and these have the exact same thing in them. They have these little color palettes based off photos where they've pulled colors out to help figure out a um, theme or color palette inspiration, and I've hung on to these for so long for the very reason. And then you're always going to have your indie dyers who are going to release these color palettes for you. And we are doing a stash down, so we're no longer buying those, or I'm not. I have a few that I still have to work through, but that doesn't mean I don't have to ignore them. I can still utilize those amazing color palettes that these designers have come up with just in a different way. So what I do now is I'll actually save a photo of the color palette that I saw online that so and so designer or indie dyer dyed up, and I will keep those in a file on my computer. And so when I go to pull for a project, I'll pull through those and be like, okay, I really like that for this time of year or this kind of project. Let me see what I have in my stash to make work that's the similar color tones. And that has been a really good resource. You can also find actual color palette things like this on Pinterest or just by doing a Google search and even saving those in a file. And I would go a little bit further. I usually have a file in my file of different subcategories. So I may have one for fall winter vibes, one for summer vibes, one for spring vibes, vintage vibes, and that way it's a quick reference and it's something that you can start now and build on, and you can utilize it for years to come. Because color inspiration is really all around us. I mean, it can definitely come from quilts that we've seen that a loved one has made us, or even color palettes that we're inspired by, or even a trip that we've been on. And there's these visual colors that we remember, and we want to immortalize that in some way, and we're able to do that through our projects. I think at the end of the day, we just kind of have to not focus on rules or on details, but more of looking at the colors around us differently and trying to figure out a way to apply those to things that bring us joy and to projects that are going to bring us joy. But it all starts with taking the time and slowing down to notice them and making note of them. I talk about my journal a lot, and I do have a little section in that for quick brain dumps. And you can even carry small little journals, and jot down information. And it's actually a great tool to utilize and get in the practice of utilizing as a maker, because often we have great intentions of trying to remember something that we saw that day that inspires us. But by the time we get home and we've had to cook or do whatever, that whole memory is gone. And we need to get in the habit of jotting that down, because life is going to happen and we are going to forget things. And we want to be able to come back to it when the time is needed. But I want you to trust yourself in choosing color. I want you to begin seeing color not as this random thing that people mysteriously pull together and it looks amazing, but that it's something that you can do the very same thing with. I want you to see how it inspires you and how it emotionally changes your attitude, and how you can use it to maybe brighten up a dark day that you may be going through. I want you to feel confident about working through your stash and still knowing that you have the ability to create amazing projects with what you have, because now you may feel a bit more confident in choosing colors that are going to allow your color work or your motif or your stitches really to stand out. And I really want this to help you if you're working through your stash, because maybe you have colors that come together in a color palette that would really inspire you, but maybe you just haven't been able to visualize it yet, I want you to feel more empowered in doing so. So if this video has helped you and seeing that or seeing how to pull colors more together, I hope that you save it and come back to it. I hope that you leave me a comment and let me know if anything that maybe you didn't think of today popped out at you that we talked about or that I showed you. And if some of these aspects that we covered you're going to utilize in your upcoming projects. And I also want to know, what kind of color palettes are you mainly drawn to? Are there any that maybe pop out like the Neon Wonder Shawlography that you've kind of wanted to do, but you've just been a little bit on the reserved side and trying? And what has been holding you back from that? Because I would love to hear. But I will see you in the next one because the princess has decided that it's time for her to go get a little bite to eat.